So imagine you're a world-renowned artist, and you're tasked with rendering the portrait of one of the most influential people of your lifetime. But there's only one problem. You think they're kind of ugly. Now, you could just do the work, get the paycheck, and honor their memory. But then you'll have to live with the shame of knowing that your name will forever be attached to the portrait of an ugly person. So what do? If you're Michelangelo, no worries at all. You just sculpt an entirely different person. Problem solved. It helps if they're already dead, so they can't complain. When Michelangelo sculpted the statues of Duke Giuliano and Duke Lorenzo from the Medici Chapel, he sculpted entirely different heads, saying something to the effect of, in 1,000 years, no one will be able to tell that they ever looked different. My name is Laura Gallagher, and I spent 1 month in Florence studying the work of the masters, and Michelangelo's body of work quickly came to command my attention. This is part 2 of my 2-part series on the topic. In part 1, I talked about my appreciation for Michelangelo's unfinished works. I form a much stronger connection to the artist when I can still appreciate their individual brushstrokes or chisel marks. It imbues the artwork with energy and warmth. I can still imagine them chipping away at it, even centuries later.
So serious artist.
In part 2, I want to talk about how Michelangelo favored expression over reproduction in order to tell the story he wanted to tell. He did not care about naturalism, was not bogged down with the rote, lifeless copying of the most minute details, just like in the case of the Giuliano and Lorenzo sculpts. This is why I believe Michelangelo would have approved of Ronaldo's original head, and not the rote, lifeless copy that was the second iteration. Seriously, why was this so controversial? Michelangelo only appears to us as a Renaissance artist because of one prominent work of his that has come to dominate the collective mind. El Gigante. Only known to us as the David. I said in my previous video on the topic that I considered the David to be one of his least interesting sculptures. Shocking, I know. But one of my goals for this video is to convince you of the same. The David is the perfect icon of the Renaissance, being square, stable, in contrapposto, and depicting an idealized representation of the human body. David's highly polished finish, combined with its sheer scale, elevates the work, giving it an appearance of not having been created by a mere meat popsicle, but through divine intervention. It's even more impressive when you consider that Michelangelo was only 26 when he started the David. Now, to be sure, the David is one of the most impressive art pieces ever created, and some might say the most famous sculpture ever created. But that's exactly what makes it so problematic. Although Michelangelo was alive during the Renaissance, to simply refer to Michelangelo as a Renaissance artist is, I think, deeply insulting to his legacy. To elevate Michelangelo to the realm of the divine is to diminish his humanity and our own ability to connect with him. So this is where we must attempt to separate the art from the artist. Most of Michelangelo's other works would break away, sometimes shockingly, with the ideals of the Renaissance, such as with his Bacchus, the god of wine, which we'll come back to shortly. So if Michelangelo isn't the quintessential sculptor of the Renaissance, then who is exactly? Donatello, of course. Don't believe me? Let's play a drinking game together. I have here a book on Donatello's body of work. Take a shot every time that there's a contrapposto on screen. I'll even join you. Shots of what? Espresso, of course. What else were you thinking? I don't want to get demonetized. Are you ready for it? Contrapposto. Contrapposto. Contrapposto.
Yeah.
Contrapposto. Contrapposto. Double contrapposto. Let us move on then and talk about how Michelangelo favored expression over reproduction. A century after the Renaissance was the Baroque, in many ways a counterpoint to the Renaissance. Baroque sculpture is highly dynamic, highly detailed, and highly naturalistic. The comparison of Bernini's David to Michelangelo's is striking in their differences. Michelangelo's Renaissance depiction of David is one of godlike beauty, whereas Bernini depicted his David as a mere mortal man, fleshy bulges and all. Between these two landmark artistic movements existed yet another, lesser-known art movement, Mannerism, an art movement emphasizing expressivity in shapes, proportions, and contrasts. You see, there's only so many contrappostos and ideal bodies you can sculpt or paint until you just want to create something fresh. And as Michelangelo aged, he moved away from the ideals of the Renaissance, of Donatello, his forebear, and towards an expressive style all his own that was the birth of the Mannerist movement. We don't talk much about Donatello in this video, but I have a soft spot for him. Some of Michelangelo's expressive style can be traced back to Donatello. His faces were stylized and imbued with emotionality. He had a tendency to play with proportions by sculpting long necks. A few details we'll come back to shortly. Unexpectedly, I stumbled upon Donatello's tomb in the crypt of San Lorenzo, and it was an undoubtedly emotional experience. A few years before his rendering of David, Michelangelo sculpted a rendition of Bacchus, the god of wine. Far from having an idealized body, Bacchus's body is round, soft, and quite feminine. His pose is vacillating, and his facial expression one of clear drunkenness. Perhaps these features don't seem all that remarkable today, but Michelangelo's depiction of Bacchus was such a stark departure from the standards of the Renaissance that it shocked the patron who commissioned the work to the point that he never even bothered to come to pick it up. The Bargello has conveniently placed Michelangelo's Bacchus in direct opposition to the Bacchus of Giambologna and the one of Sansovino to emphasize this effect. Giambologna's Bacchus, in particular, is much more sinewy and in control, reflecting the idealization of the Renaissance. Michelangelo liberally played with proportions. Looking at his Giuliano sculpture in the Medici Chapel, I am struck by how long the neck is, just like Donatello's work, a detail that comes back time and again in Mannerist art, known for its liberal exploration of proportions. Sometimes a little bit too much, and therefore it's no wonder that Baroque went for grounded naturalism. Many of the muscular figures Michelangelo sculpted or painted are unnaturally broad, even his Sibyl on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which finally brings me to the elephant in the room when discussing Michelangelo, his depiction of women. It is clear Michelangelo had a deep attraction to men, and beautiful men at that. Michelangelo did a portrait of Tommaso in a life-size cartoon, but neither before nor afterwards did he do any other portrait from life, because he hated drawing any living subject unless it were of exceptional beauty. Tommaso was one of Michelangelo's assistants, on which he lavished deep attention, and there are many passages in his biographies that hint to his passion for the male body, to whichever degree, romantically or beyond, that may be interpreted. All of the female sculptures I have personally witnessed have clear, defined, bulging muscles. Dawn is practically flexing, even though she's just waking up.
Have you ever been mistaken for a man?
Night has an extremely masculine body. In fact, if you hid the breasts, I'm not even sure it would be all that obvious that this is the representation of a female.
Now, being a trans woman myself, and considering how much time I spend at the gym, I'm not exactly a stranger to seeing people be confused by my gender presentation. So I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with depicting women like this. But in fact, I actually kind of appreciate it. It's fun to see art showing people who look like us. So Michelangelo, I know you've been dead for hundreds of years, but I just want to say thank you. Michelangelo's my dude. But it's very noteworthy considering how outside of the norm Michelangelo's depictions of women actually were for the time period, and reveals so much about his own personal biases and tastes.
This is a bit of a tangent, but there have been many interesting theories as to why knights' breasts are depicted the way that they are. One of my favorites being a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine that suggests Michelangelo may have used a cadaver of a woman with breast cancer, a known disease at the time, as his reference, in order to strengthen the depiction of night. I'll link this paper in the description of this video. Even in a painting, Michelangelo's penchant for depicting women with male traits is quite obvious. The Sibyls that he painted on top of the Sistine Chapel are a great example of that. Even when depicting Mary, Michelangelo could be quite forceful in the anatomy department. This is Mary from the Doni Tondo, and she's clearly been lifting. In fact, the most feminine sculpture of Michelangelo I came across is the sculpture of Bacchus at the Bargello, which Vasari described as such. In this figure, it is clear that Michelangelo wanted to obtain a marvelous harmony of various elements,
notably in giving it the slenderness of a youth combined with the fullness and roundness of the female form. What we can deduce from this statement is that Michelangelo was aware of the softness of the general female form as opposed to the male form, and therefore his choice of representing female figures with strong musculature was a conscious one. Both Da Vinci and Raphael, Michelangelo's contemporaries and sometimes competitors, had no such biases in their work. And this brings me to the final point as to why Michelangelo was not divine. He drew extensive inspiration from the work of his forebears. Sometimes it's easy to forget, but artists of the Renaissance, like we all do, were inspired and drew extensive knowledge of the great artists that preceded them. Renaissance artists drew their inspiration from ancient Roman and Hellenistic traditions. One of the great works of the ancient Hellenistic period is the Laocoon and Sons.
This sculpture, thought lost for the longest time,
resurfaced in 1506 in a random vineyard,
and Michelangelo was there for its unnerving. This sculpture is famous for the agonizing, twisting pose of the titular Trojan priest, and there's no doubt that it had a profound effect on Michelangelo and his depictions of his unfinished prisoners or on the genius of victory. Michelangelo enjoyed so profound and retentive a memory that he could accurately recall the works of others after he had seen them and used them for his own purposes, so skillfully that scarcely anyone ever remarked it. Michelangelo's unfinished bust of Brutus, now the Bargello, is itself inspired by another ancient Hellenistic bust, the one of Caracalla, itself inspired by the head of John C. Reilly. And finally, as mentioned previously, a lot of Michelangelo's style has been formed by his own appreciation of Donatello's style, of which Michelangelo was sometimes critical and sometimes admiring. He was once standing by Orson Michele, where he had stopped to gaze at Donatello's statue of St. Mark, and a passerby asked him what he thought of it. Michelangelo replied that he had never seen a figure which had more the air of a good man than this one. I wanted to point out all these different inspirations of Michelangelo's to show you that any artist does not exist in a vacuum. He just believed in tasteful copying, what we commonly call inspiration. We owe our own abilities, style, and knowledge to the work of our forebears. And there is some truth to the notion that imitation is a compliment, and one we shouldn't be ashamed of, provided, of course, that it is not direct plagiarism. Believe me, it is hard right now not to turn this particular video into a rant about the ravages of AI and its blatant disregard for copyright. But that will have to be a topic for a future video. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this video to hear my thoughts about that when I do get around to recording a video on that particular topic. Although Michelangelo favored expression over reproduction and developed a style all his own that would influence generations to come, Michelangelo was not divine, but a mere mortal artist, and a relatable one at that. Like a lot of us, he was very self-conscious and apparently destroyed a large portion of his work right before his death, to hide to those that would follow just how hard he worked. Once, when our biographer Vasari visited Michelangelo in his old age, and soon before his death, Michelangelo was working on a sculpture of a Pietà, and was clearly distressed by his rendition of one of Christ's legs, which he would eventually break off, by the way. Vasari's eyes fell on the leg of the Christ, on which Michelangelo was working and making some alterations, and he started to look closer. But to stop Vasari seeing it, Michelangelo let the lamp fall from his hand, and they were left in darkness. And Michelangelo then said, "One day my body will fall just like that lamp, and my light will be put out."